International investment is really the engine that makes the global economy go round. But what happens when a massive billion-dollar deal goes sour? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden legal machinery that makes it all work. We're talking about the absolutely crucial concept of consent to arbitration. Yeah, think about that for a second. It's a pretty daunting question, right? You're a private company. Your opponent is a sovereign state with its own laws, its own courts, its own army even. And that power imbalance right there is the central problem that investor-state arbitration was designed to solve. And this really gets to the heart of the problem. You can see why a foreign investor might be a little nervous about relying on a host country's local courts. You're worried about that home field advantage. International arbitration, on the other hand, offers a neutral playing field. It's a place where both sides agree beforehand that the decision will be final and binding, and that creates the predictability and trust you need for these huge cross-border investments to even happen. All right, so here's the game plan for today. We're going to start with that investor's dilemma, then we'll define what we mean by the cornerstone concept of consent. After that, we'll explore the three main ways you get to yes, navigate some of the tricky legal stuff, and then wrap it all up with why this matters for everyone. So let's start with this fundamental conflict. You've got a private company on one side and a whole sovereign nation on the other. So how in the world do you level the playing field so that both sides feel safe enough to get into a multi-billion-dollar project that could last for decades? Well, the answer, the key, is consent. Honestly, you can think of it as the golden ticket. Without it, you can't even get into the game of international arbitration. A country can't be dragged into this kicking and screaming. It has to willingly agree to it. And here's the textbook definition for you. It's that mutual handshake, that moment where both sides agree to step away from the national courts and into a neutral, international forum. It's basically saying, hey, let's play by a different set of rules for this. And this quote from Christoph Schröder, man, it just nails it. Indispensable. That's the key word. It's not optional. It's not a nice to have. It is the absolute foundation. Without mutual consent, an arbitration tribunal has zero power, no authority, no jurisdiction. End of story. Okay, so if consent is that critical, how does it actually happen? How do these two sides, the investor and the state, actually shake hands in the real world? Well, it turns out there are three main ways this goes down. It really boils down to three main pathways: a direct agreement that's written into a contract, an open offer made in a country's own laws, and the most common method we see today, an offer made through an international treaty. Let's break each of those down. First up, you've got the most obvious one, the direct agreement. The investor and the state sign a contract for a specific project, say building a power plant, and right there in the contract, they spell it out. They include an arbitration clause. It's like a prenup for the investment, saying exactly how they'll handle any disagreements before they even start. All right, path number two is a little different. It's kind of like an open invitation. A country really wants to attract foreign money, so it passes a national law that basically says, hey, to any foreign investor who comes here, we promise you the option of international arbitration. The offer is just sitting there on the books, waiting for an investor to say, I accept, which they do by filing a claim. And that brings us to the big one, the third and most common path these days: bilateral investment treaties, or BITs. Think of this as a master agreement between two countries, like the US and Germany. It contains a standing offer of arbitration to all investors from the other country. This is what's called arbitration without privity, because you don't need a direct contract between the investor and the state. The treaty itself is the handshake. And if you look at the actual language in these treaties, it's crystal clear. Look at this phrase, hereby consents. It doesn't say may consent or will think about it. It's a direct, binding offer made right there in the treaty, just waiting for an investor to take them up on it. All right, so we've got these three paths to getting that handshake agreement. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, not so fast. Just like any legal system, it's not always a straight shot. There are all sorts of conditions, procedural hurdles, and potential loopholes that everyone has to deal with. So one of the first roadblocks you'll often hit is this mandatory waiting period. Most treaties say that after a problem comes up, the two sides have to spend a cooling-off period, usually somewhere between 3 and 12 months, just trying to negotiate a peaceful solution. You can't just storm off and file for arbitration on day one. But, and this is a big but, here's where things get messy. The tribunals themselves can't even agree on how important these waiting periods are. On one side, you have cases like Lauder versus the Czech Republic, where the tribunal basically said, look, it's a formality. If talking is obviously pointless, we can skip it. But then on the other hand, you've got cases like Enron versus Argentina, where the tribunal treated it as a hard and fast rule. No waiting period, no case. And that creates a ton of uncertainty.
Okay, let's talk about another massive decision an investor has to make. You've got a dispute. Where do you take it? Because this choice, well, it can have permanent consequences.
A lot of these treaties have what's called a fork in the road clause. It's literally what it sounds like. It gives the investor one choice, and it is irreversible. You can take your dispute to the host country's local courts, or you can go to international arbitration. But you cannot do both. Once you pick a path, the other one is closed off to you for that dispute, forever. All right, now let's get into something really interesting, what you might call a strategic loophole. Many treaties have something called a most favored nation, or FNN, clause. This is a powerful little tool. It basically says that if the host country signs a different treaty with some other country and that treaty has better perks, you get to have those better perks too. It's like a best deal guarantee. So how does this work in the real world? Let's look at the classic case, Maffezini versus Spain. Here's the situation. An Argentine investor in Spain was covered by the Argentina-Spain Treaty. That treaty had a really tough rule. You had to try your luck in Spanish courts for 18 months before you could even think about arbitration. But the investor's lawyers were clever. They noticed that Spain's other treaty with Chile had no such requirement. You could go straight to arbitration. So what happened? The investor argued that under the MFN clause, they should get the better, faster procedure from the Chile-Spain treaty. And guess what? The tribunal agreed. They let the investor import that better rule and bypass the whole 18-month local court nightmare. This practice became known as treaty shopping, and let me tell you, it is still one of the most hotly debated things in all of investment law. So, after digging through all these legal weeds, waiting periods, forks in the road, FMN clauses, let's pull back for a second. Why do these technical details matter so much? At the end of the day, it all comes back to one thing: building a foundation of trust. So let's just boil this all down. What are the big takeaways? First, consent is absolutely everything. It's the non-negotiable ticket to the game. Second, that handshake happens in one of three ways: contracts, laws, or treaties. Third, getting to arbitration isn't always easy. There are critical legal hurdles you have to clear. And finally, clever lawyers can sometimes use MFN clauses to find loopholes around those hurdles, but it is super controversial. And that really brings us to the big final question. This entire system that underpins global investment is built on this one idea of consent. But when you look at how differently tribunals interpret the rules and the legal gymnastics that lawyers use, you have to ask yourself, is this a solid, stable foundation that builds trust? Or is it more like a floor filled with legal trapdoors where the outcome just depends on which treaty you use and which arbitrators you get? The answer to that question is going to shape the future of global commerce for a long time to come.